Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where at least 14 people have died, including children, in an attack in the eastern Ituri province. The attack took place near the town of Fataki at a camp for displaced persons. Suspected militants from the Codeco group have been blamed by local sources. They were also blamed for an attack on a gold mine in Jugu in the same province on Sunday, which resulted in dozens of deaths. In West Africa, a desperate search for 8 miners who were trapped by floodwaters more than half a kilometre underground at a Canadian-owned zinc mine in West Africa is turning into an international effort as new equipment arrives at the site. The workers have been trapped for more than 3 weeks at the Pekoa mine in Burkina Faso after heavy thunderstorms triggered flash flooding on April the 16th. They are believed to be about 550 meters below the surface, with possible access to an emergency chamber at a depth of 580 meters. According to officials, the shelter inside the mine will have oxygen for approximately a fortnight, yet there will be a lack of food resources. 6 of the trapped workers are from Burkina Faso, while the others are from Tanzania and Zambia. High-capacity pumping equipment from Ghana was trucked to the mine late last week, and more pumps are scheduled to arrive by plane from South Africa this week. Over in Ghana, authorities have suspended a search operation for the missing crew of a fishing vessel that sank off the country's western coast. According to officials, stormy weather conditions and difficulty in hauling a net full of fish are believed to have led the vessel to capsize. 15 people were rescued alive, but 8 others are still missing. Rescuers also retrieved the body of the captain, one of 6 Chinese citizens on board. The authorities say they are still monitoring to see whether bodies of the missing persons will be washed ashore. And in Namibia, local authorities say tourists who were reported as having disappeared in the Fish River Canyon have been accounted for. A search was launched for the hikers over the weekend amid uncertainty over their actual numbers. They included a South African couple who were said to have sent out multiple distress signals, prompting the rescue mission. Officials have urged all tourists and hikers at the canyon to register before continuing to their respective destinations. And some updates from the COVID-19 pandemic now. Africa's efforts to develop its own vaccine production capacity have been dealt a blow. The World Health Organization and its COVID-19 vaccine partner, Gavi, say they have no immediate plans to buy shots made by Aspen Pharmacare. The South African company completed a deal in March to package, sell and distribute Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine. That was lauded as a game-changing moment for a continent frustrated by sluggish Western handouts. But expectations of high demand in Africa, where just 1/6 of adults are fully vaccinated, have not materialized. Aspen CEO Stephen Sahad last week warned it would be forced to repurpose about half of its vaccine production capacity if orders do not pick up. Dr. Oluwaseun Akinyemi is a consultant health physician at University College Hospital Ibadan. He joins us now for more on the program. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, despite 16% of people on the continent being fully vaccinated against COVID-19, why do you think the continent's only vaccine plant is struggling?
Well, thank you very much for that question. One, it's a law of demand and supply. As you rightly said, only about 16% of Africans are vaccinated with the complete dose of COVID vaccine. And of all the vaccine used in Africa, only 1% is produced in Africa. We are used, like in many other sectors, many parts of Africa will prefer to import, although it's a quick fix to import. But on the long term, it is not sustainable, and it is not good for our economy. It is not good for our capacity development. So we have always depended on importation and, as you put it earlier, on and out from developed countries. So many African countries still depend on this handouts rather than invest in local production. Of course, there are about 14 countries in Africa, including Nigeria, that have capacity for vaccine production. But presently, only the South African plant of the Aspen is producing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. But unless we decide to patronize our own production, this sort of thing is going to continue. And future investors are not likely to want to put their money in a venture like this if Africans are not willing to patronize our own local products. So it's something that we need to change our mindset. We need to have a round table discussion. Political leaders in Africa need to put their money where the mouth is and ensure that we invest more in local production and patronize the country's own production. That's the way forward. And that's the only way we can sustain production of vaccines in Africa.
And you know, Doctor, the production of vaccines in Africa was seen as a key to vaccine equity and making the continent less dependent on the West to fight this and also future pandemics. As it stands, do you think the continent is ready for another pandemic?
Well, presently, as it stands, we are now ready because you remember that in 2021, that was last year, there is a lot of vaccine nationalism. We are hit by vaccine nationalism where companies prefer to produce for their own countries rather than send abroad. So for us, we need to be looking forward now. We need to, our leaders need to be more visionary, especially our medical managers as well as our political leaders. We are not ready for another pandemic because in case of another pandemic, we are still going to experience vaccine nationalism and we are not producing locally. So we're not likely to be able to take care of our own people or our own demand. And this is something we should be looking to resolve it. We should look at the future. Are we able to meet the demand of the African people? And this is something we should be exploring. And this, we should be looking at sustainability issues. And the Aspen Pharmacare company that you mentioned earlier is one that should be encouraged. Although we are not totally producing locally, we just got the license to produce the Johnson & Johnson, but at least it's still a step in the right direction. And it's something we should invest both in research and in actual production. We need to invest.
And amid the threats of variants, how can authorities on the continent continue to encourage people to get the jab, even as safety measures most of them have now been relaxed?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very subtle, a very delicate balance. We need to keep up the pressure for people to get the vaccine, but we must not put too much pressure. And I will personally, as a community physician, I will not encourage the use of force or to legislate that people must get vaccinated by force. But then we need to put up a subtle pressure. We need to encourage people, give incentive for people to get vaccinated and keep up the health messages. We should not let down our guard. We are not near herd immunity yet. We need to encourage people. We need to, at every opportunity and as much as possible, we need to, as much as feasible, integrate COVID vaccination into routine immunization. I think that's the way forward. And that is something that is going to be sustainable so that in every primary healthcare center, COVID vaccination is available. We have information materials all over encouraging people to get vaccinated. And then we keep telling people that it is safe and it is for their own benefit and for the benefit of other people in the community that they get vaccinated.
All right then, Dr. Oluwaseun Akinyemi, thank you so much for your thoughts on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Moving on now, the Parliament in Mauritius is to debate a motion of no confidence filed against the government by the leader of the opposition. The motion follows last month's protest against high food prices of foodstuffs, public transport, petroleum products and cooking gas. The opposition also wants the government to reverse some of its unhealthy policies and take urgent measures to improve the well-being of citizens. The no-confidence motion is the first in 26 years. The second phase of a UN-led intra-Sudanese political dialogue is scheduled to begin today amidst divisions among the country's political parties over their participation. Several parties said they will boycott the talks aimed at resolving the political crisis that followed the October 25th military coup. The UN, the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development bloc are seeking to mediate between the military, pro-democracy activists and opposition parties. Those boycotting the talks include the Sudanese Professionals Association, the Sudanese Communist Party and the Sudanese Congress Party. Some political parties have described the talks as an attempt to legitimize the military coup. And Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara has urged his counterparts in the West to help restore degraded land and increase food production. Speaking at the opening ceremony of the 15th UN Climate Conference of Parties in Abidjan, he called on developed countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mobilize funds to help developing countries adapt to climate change. COP15 gave Ivory Coast the opportunity to present an important program in the fight against desertification called the Abidjan Initiative. The initiative aims to mobilize $1.5 billion from donors to restore degraded land and strengthen agricultural productivity in the country. 9 African heads of state, including Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi, were in attendance. And back here in Nigeria, about 13 persons have reportedly been killed, 51 injured and over 107 houses destroyed after a windstorm wreaked havoc on communities in YOBE State. The windstorm, which started on Monday evening, affected 3 areas of the state capital.
A lot of long faces in Abari, Sumsuma and Pompomari communities of Damaturu, the YOBE state capital, and the newly built ultra-modern market after a windstorm wreaked havoc in those areas. Those who survived the tragedy are trying to pick up the pieces. In this household, a breastfeeding mother, her daughter and a teenager were killed after a building collapsed.
Normally,
when a windstorm starts, everyone will rush for safety. My neighbor's wife went out to buy things with her daughter, and the windstorm was so heavy that they had to hide here for safety. And suddenly, the building collapsed, killing her, her daughter, and one of her house helps, who happens to be my disciple.
When the windstorm started, everyone was sitting down. One of the women's daughter was outside. The bricks started to fall on us, which it later killed her daughter. And in the process of evacuating the daughter, the wall fell on the woman, and she was also killed.
The executive secretary, YOBE State Emergency Management Agency, reveals that 5 persons were confirmed dead at the hospital and survivors are being assisted.
As at yesterday night, over 51 victims were evacuated to the hospital. Unfortunately, we lost 5 of them, but the remaining ones, those that were critically injured, have been receiving treatment throughout the night and is free of charge. And those that have little bruises were treated and discharged accordingly. But we thank to the manager of the YOBE State Hospital for being on ground to respond, and we have provided all the consumables needed free to the victims.
When Channels Television visited the accident and emergency unit of the state specialist hospital in Damaturu, all the injured persons had been discharged and the corpses released to the affected families.
While Africa is yet to fully recover from the socio-economic repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine conflict poses another major threat to the global economy, with many African countries being directly affected. The United Nations Development Programme's Africa Director says the continent is facing an unprecedented crisis and global solidarity is needed more than ever.
Have never experienced greater pressure and challenge on our ability to sustain peace and development on a healthy planet as we experience today. A global pandemic that upended the world and changed it forever. We've seen resulting from that, but also in terms of pre-existing conditions, rise in poverty and inequality. We saw how COVID-19 complicated the effort to maintain or to overcome the insecurity there that's created by many forces, including violent extremism. And the impact of this, the consequences affecting lives and livelihoods, but also creating immense discontent among the population, which has led to a regression in democracy.
We were hoping to see a bounce back from.
Meanwhile, the UNDP's Africa chief economist highlights that as inflation rates are soaring, it's also becoming more difficult for households and companies to enhance property and reduce poverty. Raymond Gilpin says a rise in prices that will begin could create another front of discontent and possibly unrest, particularly in countries with upcoming elections, where the electoral environment is already quite emotional.
It's an unprecedented crisis for the continent. It's unprecedented because the continent is facing a trifecta, the ongoing effects of the COVID pandemic, the newly felt effects of the Russia-Ukraine war, and thirdly, the climate-related challenges and pressures. The global inflation is being imported into African economies because Africa is so dependent on imports for food, fuel, medicines, and consumer durables. We are going to see tensions. Whether or not this would spill over into violent protests is unclear, but what history, particularly recent history, has taught us is that this is a distinct possibility.
In Zimbabwe, fuel prices are rising and the currency rapidly devaluing. The country's annual inflation jumped to 96% in April, up from 61% in January. This has had an impact on fertilizer prices, which has hit small-scale farmers the hardest. United Nations agencies are warning that price hikes sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine will worsen a food crisis in Africa, where tens of millions of people have already been plunged into extreme poverty by the COVID-19 pandemic, armed conflict, climate shocks, and economic turmoil.
Due to the rise in fertilizer prices, Boniface Mutize, who grows maize and soybeans just outside Harare, has started making his own fertilizer by mixing cow dung or chicken waste with zinc. But he needs ammonium nitrate, which is not produced in large quantities in Zimbabwe.
We are doing our own fertilizer now. We are mixing 7 bags of cow dung or the cattle manure or the chicken waste with 20 mils of zinc to make compounds. But the difficult part of this is just compound. We need to do AN. It's very difficult to do AN, but we are producing AN at a very low quantity.
The war has disrupted shipping in the Black Sea, a major artery for grains and other commodities, throttling exports from Russia and Ukraine to markets including Africa. Ukraine has said the area sown with grains could fall by around 1/5 this year because of the war.
It's an almost grotesque situation that we see at the moment in Ukraine. There are nearly 25 million tons of grain that could be exported, but they cannot leave the country simply because of the lack of infrastructure and the blockade of the ports.
The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says nearly half of African countries rely on Russia and Ukraine for wheat imports. Russia is also a major supplier of fertilizer to at least 11 countries.
This war, the Ukraine war, is overlapping. The impact is overlapping with a crisis that has already been unfolding in several countries.
Even before the conflict in Ukraine, food inflation was pushing many African families to the brink. In Zimbabwe, where annual inflation jumped to 96% in April, up from 61% in January, households are already feeling the pain.
Prices have gone up in shops, meal number one, cooking oil, sugar, all those are basic things. Rentals have also gone up. So at the end of the day, what many Zimbabweans like myself are likely going to do is to earn a salary. Within 2 days, you must make sure you change that money from Zimbabwean dollar to US dollar, buy your basics.
We used to have 3 meals a day. We used to buy even meat. You could get meat and eat meat almost 5 days a week. But these days, you can even go for 7 days without getting any meat, without getting 3 meals a day. So it's really tough for people, and it's really tough for a basic family, for a family that is living from basic salaries, to have a good life.
In March, the Grain Millers Association of Zimbabwe hiked prices for wheat, flour, and staple maize meal by about 15%, citing surging global prices linked to the Ukraine war.
Of late, there's a shortage of baking fat. So our baking fat comes mostly from South Africa. And then the oil, most of it is being made locally. But then it has also risen, I'm sure, due to the Ukraine war and also the fuel costs going up. So those are some of the major issues.
According to the Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency, about half Zimbabwe's 15 million people survive on less than $1.90 per day. The UN World Food Programme estimates that some 5.3 million Zimbabweans, around a third of the population, are food insecure.
And finally on the programme, the African Champions League final will be played in Morocco on the 30th of May after Senegal withdrew its bid to host the game. This announcement by the Confederation of African Footballs comes a day after Champions League semi-finalist Al Ahly asked for the match to be played at a neutral venue. The Egyptian reigning champions hold a 4-0 advantage over Algeria after the first leg of the semi-final. The exact venue for the match has not been announced yet. And that's the programme today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shaboale.